Muehlhausen. I'm the director of the Anna Porter Public Library here in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, and I would like to welcome Hannah Springer. Springer, right? Did I say
Yep,
that correct?
yep.
Okay, good. I mean, from a Muehlhausen to a Springer, I figured we probably could pronounce it right. But um, she's here to talk about the ecological balance and restoration that's happening in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And the Great Smoky Mountains is one of the most biodiverse parks in the national park system. It has over 19,000 species in over 800 square miles, and there's no other area this size in a temperate climate that can boast the amount of biological diversity per square mile. And almost 95% of the park is forested, giving homes to thousands of species of plants, animals, fungi, and other organisms. It is vital to the ecological balance that the park is monitored and maintained to protect the unique biodiversity that the Great Smoky Mountains National Park hosts. So that's where Hannah comes in, and she is conducting vegetation management with the CAC AmeriCorps within the park. And we're going to learn how she's treating hemlock and ash trees to prevent insect damage and removing invasive plants that threaten the ecological balance of the park. So without further ado, I would like you to welcome Hannah.
All right. Well, hi everyone. So today's presentation is Unearthing Ecological Restoration, the Great Smoky Mountains, and Climate Optimism. We're going to talk a little bit more about ecological restoration in general, and talking about just fundamentals, guiding principles, some of the main core tenets of it, alongside why it's important and how you go about restoring a landscape. And then we'll get to the more specific restoration projects that are happening in the park, and then also discuss some other restoration projects I've done outside of my CAC AmeriCorps term, and finally end on climate optimism. So, what is ecological restoration and why should we care? To start, at the inception of ecological restoration as a professional field in the 1970s, the definition for restoration work was rather nebulous. A lot of people, it was tied to their locality and it was really based on the community needs. And in fact, a lot of projects that were restorative happened before the 1970s field conception. In the park in the 1940s, there was restoration work starting with the removal of kudzu. And I know in the 1960s, there was marshland reclamation projects. So in the 1980s, though, the Society of Ecological Restoration kind of set the stage of a uniform answer of what is ecological restoration. And according to the SER, ecological restoration is the process of assisting the recovery of a native ecosystem that has been degraded, damaged, or destroyed. To define those terms, damaged is the category of minimal impact to the ecosystem due to human actions. So that would be selective poaching or small invasion of exotic species, really manageable, it's really recoverable. Degraded is the next threat level, and it is, quote, chronic human impacts resulting in the loss of biodiversity and the disruption of an ecosystem structure, composition, and functionality. We see that in the park with the hemlock woolly adelgid, which when it invaded the park, it destroyed one of the foundational tree species that helps control stream health, controlled temperatures. And if that tree species would have been removed, we might have seen the rise of stream temperatures, potentially die off of fish, and you can imagine the domino going on and on and on. So that would be considered a degraded ecosystem if we had not intervened and saved the hemlock tree species. Destroyed is the highest level and one of the hardest to address. This refers to ecosystems that are void of macroscopic life and physically changed. So, ecosystems that have no plants or animals are very few, and also ecosystems that have been, again, physically changed to level topography, dried up lakes, coastal erosion, etc. Examples would be urbanization, land clearing for large scale agriculture, and timber cutting. So, ecological restoration is therefore a process to combat damage and degradation to prevent or even recover destroyed ecosystems. And when we talk about restoration, that is the process, and recovery is the goal. Nevertheless, Ecological restoration is not a field singular to the US. In 2021, the United Nations declared 2021 to 2030 to be the decade on ecological restoration. In preparation for those concerted efforts, in 2019, restoration organizations across the globe came together to make a uniformed primer for everyone to share resources and to make a more uniform vocabulary when talking about the issue. And that's called the International Principles and Standards for the Practice of Ecological Restoration. And it is available online for free for those who are interested. So, why is ecological restoration important? The first is that it helps the preservation of ecosystem services, resilience, and biodiversity. Our ecosystems provide us countless services beyond just clean air and water. Clean and healthy soil is what we use for foraging, for farming, for hunting, and it also provides materials we use for housing, for clothing, etc. So, restoration is important not just for the sake of preserving nature, but also for all the services it provides. And also, restoration helps preserve habitat that allows for biodiversity to thrive. Ecological restoration is also important because it helps with climate change impact mitigation. One of the aspects of restoration is reintroducing disturbance regimes to a landscape, and one of those is prescribed burns. So, some forests need fire to function, and a lot of plant species are co evolved with fire. So, if there is no fire, a lot of plant species will start to dwindle. But not only that, you can see a increase of fuels. And so, when a wildfire happens, it will actually um, increase the impact of that wildfire. So, by doing restoration work, you can mitigate climate change, natural disasters, and their impacts on local communities. Another is the reinstitution and strengthening of cultural landscapes. Humanity and nature is inextricably interconnected, and as such, we have a cultural imprint on the landscapes that surround us. And restoration does the work of keeping those landscapes intact for future care, for future people to learn off of, and current people to have those connections still. And finally, ecological restoration is important because it complements other conservation efforts. Um, we have a local conservation organization, Conservation Fisheries, and they help preserve fish species biodiversity in Tennessee. But there would be less of a success story of conservation fisheries, I would argue, if there was no streams to reintroduce them to. Otherwise, it'd be a storage facility for a whole bunch of fish. Um, so I would like to argue that ecological restoration does complement other conservation efforts. So, what are some of the guiding principles? This is a graphic from the UN that is meant to kind of outline the principles for this decade of restoration. Uh, to sum it up, because it is kind of dense reading, the main principles they want is that restoration should be a bottom up conversation. So, local landholders, people who hold botanical, traditional, ecological knowledge, should be the ones who are communicating about a restoration plan and creating it, and then communicating those needs to higher organizations, whether they be nonprofit or governmental. Another core tenet is that there should be no half measures. All restoration work should be done to its fullest extent. And not only that, restoration work should not be treating the symptoms, but rather the actual causes. So, when I did marshland reclamation, a big issue was areas further up the watershed would be dumping pollutants, whether that be fertilizers or pesticides. So you would treat the marshland and hope to like stop algal blooms or stop the fish die off, but there would be the constant reintroduction of those pollutants, and so the work would be basically defunct if you do not address what's happening further up the watershed. And then another important one is just considering other factors that impact the restoration. There are economic and cultural contexts to every landscape, and some people can't afford restoration work if it's tied to their local economy, whether that be agriculture or timber. So, having a conversation that negotiates between those factors is always important. So, with that, how do you restore an ecosystem? This is kind of the very boiled down version from my certificate from the University of Minnesota. Um, and there is way more intensive courses that will go into depth about each of these steps, but this is kind of the fundamentals. So, step one is survey, research, and start records. It's very important. In fact, the minute you want to restore a landscape, just start recording, open up a Word doc, get a voice memo, start talking about what you're doing, because this needs to be recorded throughout the whole process. And then after that, surveying and research. So figuring out the water budget for a landscape, recording the topography, doing botanical surveys, testing out soil, doing the land history to see how the land was used, and also what the landscape was supposed to look like. There are a lot of surveyors that left journals about what the land looked like before it became used or settled. So just getting to that original state and finding out how it's supposed to look like and what you got going on before you start planning. So then step two is planning and networking. This is when you start talking to other organizations, when you start looking for funding, budgeting, planning the actual restoration. And also, that's the important key when you start talking with other stakeholders in the land rather than just the restorationist itself. Step three is implement the initial stages. So this is the hardest step. This is where the most backbreaking work happens. This is removing the kudzu, finding all the barbed wire and pulling it up. This is where you're starting to address the actual causes of the issues. So maybe going up to that local farm and talking about the pollutants they're dumping and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's also the stage where you're starting to gather materials, where you're building your greenhouses, where you're starting your revegetation process if you're revegetating, because that should happen a year, 6 months before you actually plan to revegetate an area. And then step four is monitor, revise. So you're monitoring those initial stages, seeing what needs to happen. A lot of land management is kind of improvisation to a certain point and reacting to what you see, because you can do all that's like best management practices, and then something could happen you weren't expecting. Um, with marshlands, at least in northeastern Indiana, a lot of them were used as agricultural lands, and so people put drainage tiles below the soil to stop ponding. So a lot of people will over predict the water budget or under predict it and assume that there's going to be less water, the soil's going to be drier. But when they bust the drainage tiles, they realize the area that they restored might be more ponded year round and needs a different plant type, and it can't support what they originally thought was supposed to go there. So step four is definitely the monitoring and revising what you put there. And step five is implementing changes from that revision and secondary stages. So these are the stages that are perhaps more sensitive. So reintroducing a species, the revegetation stage, potentially also like wildlife reintroduction. Um, and that ends with step six, which is monitor again, revise, and outreach, getting people involved. Don't let your restoration project go quietly into the night, and just make sure people know what's going on. And then I have an arrow that's kind of circling through steps four and six. And that's just to show that this is kind of a never ending process. Restoration does technically end with ecosystem recovery, but ecosystem recovery is a long term goal. There are people who are still invested in the landscape. The park is still doing restoration work after starting in the 1940s. So a lot of this is constant monitoring, working, spot treating, etc. So yeah, you'll basically be in step four through six for however long you can be. So to provide an example, we'll do a case study on Gregory Bald, or also known as the place of the giant rabbit. So Gregory Bald, sitting at 4,949 feet elevation, is one of the two maintained grassy balds in the Great Smoky Mountains and one of the 20 historic grassy balds in the park. Moreover, grassy balds are considered G1, which means they're globally rare. And this ecosystem only exists in a few places in Virginia, Tennessee, and majorly North Carolina, according to my research. Nevertheless, known for its flame azaleas, which are blooming currently. You should hike Gregory Bald. Gregory Bald is a popular hiking spot for many visitors. However, the history of Gregory Bald is rather fascinating. Originally, the Cherokee settled this area and they called it the place of the rabbit. I have the Cherokee name up there, but I do not believe I'd be able to pronounce that correctly, so I'll leave it there for your viewing pleasure. Um, and the bald is believed to be the location of the giant rabbit chief. The post settlement, the bald gained its name after one particular resident, Russell Gregory. Russell Gregory ran sheep through this area, and used the open grassy landscape as majorly grazing during the summer season. During the Civil War, Russell Gregory served as a federal soldier and militia leader, leading uh, efforts in Cades Cove against raiding Confederate parties. But after Russell Gregory's passing, Gregory Bald was still used as a grazing area mainly for a lot of residents within Cades Cove. But after the park's foundation, the grazing stopped. It was halted in 1934, and there was one person who still continued to graze until 1935 before he was found and kicked out by park rangers. So, restoration of Gregory Bald did not begin with the foundation of the park, but the need for restoration did start with the halting of grazing animals. From the Ice Age all the way up to 1934, there had always been megafauna to graze on Gregory's Bald. But with the park's rules that made it illegal, there was no longer any megafauna or any animals in general to graze on the bald. And as such, it shrunk and shrunk and shrunk until the 1980s. Vegetation management in the park decided to do a mowing operation to help restore the bald. And they chose mowing because this is a disturbance regime that helps mimic what grazing would look like. Um, and with that, the vegetation management team mows the bald regularly about twice a year. It used to be more in the past. And they also fell trees to help stop woody encroachment to keep the 9 acres open. They also combat blueberry and blackberry, which is kind of pioneer species that like to take over very quickly. And as someone who mows the bald, when you leave after a mowing session, you come back 3 months later and the blackberry is just as big as when you left it. So it really does like to grow. It's pretty ferocious. Um, but with this intervention, we were able to keep the bald up to its original size. So is a map of partial map of some of our work we do at Gregory Bald. And it has mowing parcels, which are highlighted in the pastel colors. These mowing parcels are rotated on a couple years basis, and they are mainly the blueberry patches that we have to kind of mow down. We leave a lot of them open for wildlife, for food, and then everything that is non-shaded, the lighter tan, is grassy areas that we mow ourselves. So we are mowing around less than 9 acres. We don't mow the whole bald because there is the flame azaleas. Um, but it works, and the grassy bald has stayed open. And in fact, a couple of researchers, Irene M. Rosel and Claire H. Robertson, recently released a 20-year long study about blackberry management in grassy balds on April 22nd, 2026. They were studying the Blue Ridge Parkway, but I think this is a similar enough ecosystem that the studies can be interchangeable. But they realized that this has an effect of keeping blackberry density down over time, and not only that, allows for native grasses and forbs to flourish. So the science proves the work works too. But Gregory Bald is a drop in the bucket, I would like to say, for all the restoration work we do in the park. Um, as Mandy mentioned earlier, we do hemlock treatment, we do invasive species management. There are about, I think, 12 of us on the team right now who manage all the vegetation projects in the park. And we do also revegetation and a lot of work just to make sure that this public lands is preserved in its pristine biodiverse state. But other than the park, I have worked on several other restoration projects across the US, and they've all shown different aspects of dealing with different climate change issues or human impacts that have degraded nature. Up at the top left is the Little River Wetland Project. That is a project I worked on in Fort Wayne, Indiana. It is the largest marshland reclamation project, urban marshland reclamation project currently going on. And it dealt with some pretty interesting issues with just ag dumping and drainage tiles and how to recover small agricultural plots, seeing as there's an issue in northeastern Indiana where bigger agricultural companies will buy smaller farms that are busting because of ponding. And so there is more grant funding being given to buy up those lands before big ag gets them and restore them back to the marshlands. especially because in northeastern Indiana, this used to be a large wetland called the Great Marsh, and it was so large, a surveyor once called it the Everglades of the North. But now it is farmland and urban areas, so dealing with urbanization and agriculture was a big issue there. On the other side of the screen is some work I did out in Oregon in the Willamette Valley. And that one was interesting. It was more about how to preserve habitat and how to restore habitat areas. With climate change, temperature bands are shifting. So, a major issue restorationists are working on is creating resiliency in the northern sections of animals' habitats and their home ranges. So as temperatures increase, they can move more northward and perhaps find refuge there. So when we do potentially lower temperatures again, they can return back to the southern portions of their home range, but just creating refuge areas for this wildlife. And then another area that I worked with restoration unintentionally was in Seldovia, Alaska. I was there to do organic farming, but I ended up doing restoration work. And the main issue there was ornamentals. A lot of people like to bring stuff that reminds them of home when they move out there. And a lot of ornamental plants tend to be very invasive. They are highly competitive against the native species. I also learned about an invasive bug that was destroying one of their spruce species, which in the forest here, as you can see in this center picture, is majorly spruce. I believe they only have 3 tree species in that area, so it's basically killing off 1/3 of the tree species populations of their forest. And that was a huge issue, not just for timber, but also for the ecosystems itself. So they were doing work to address that issue. However, after all the work that I've done with all these different organizations, it's kind of led me to this next movement, which is climate optimism. Um, in the work Climate Optimism by Zara Biabani, the author states that climate optimism is a framework based on the idea that we can restore the earth back to health, and in doing so, protect the people that inhabit the planet. And while reading this work, I found the vocabulary to describe a secondary impact of ecological restoration, and that is, with fear sounding cheesy, hope. Yes, the physical labor of restoration leads to healthier, more resilient ecosystems. The science proves it's necessary for ecosystem recovery, combating habitat destruction, and a plethora of other climate change related issues. However, I believe the work completed in ecological restoration gives us hope in a very material way. Um, Not only that, I believe the work completed in ecological restoration allows us to be optimistic in the face of overwhelming climate change issues. It makes climate change, ecosystem destruction more manageable and easier divided parcels that we can all address in different restoration organizations across the United States and globally. However, climate optimism and ecological restoration are not quick turnaround movements. They don't have quick results. They require patience, proactivity, and honestly, not potentially seeing results within your lifetime, but still having hope that something will come out of this. But in the year 2026, I think we stand at a perfect point. We can look at all the work that has been done over the past decades and realize that it does have results and continue having that optimistic outlook on the future. Um, so yeah, I believe that climate optimism and ecological restoration are kind of they're intertwined and they both kind of fuel each other. And the author here would agree too. But with that, I'd like to show some of my resources that I used for the researching of this presentation. A lot of these are accessible online for free, and Climate Optimism is, I believe, still purchasable on different book purchasing websites. But with that, I'd like to thank you guys for coming to this presentation. And does anybody have any questions? Yes. I actually, my last day is going to be July 1st. So I'm getting to the end of a 2-year stint and then it's off somewhere else.
I was gonna say where.
I'm going to be farming in Hawaii and then doing environmental education out in California. There, yes.
Hi, yes, this is a growing concern. Have you encountered working with corporations with data centers?
I have not, but I know that's like a huge issue with water usage. Right now, there is a huge data center they're trying to build in Utah, which right now is facing one of the largest water shortages it's faced like ever. Like it's like century defining drought, and they're still trying to build data centers. I would say in the world of ecological restoration, it would be a huge detriment just for that aspect of predicting a water budget and factoring in now that maybe your watershed is going to be a tapping in point for a data center could really radically change the capabilities restorationists might have if they don't have, let's say, large guns to fight against these data centers. If it's just a smaller business.
Do you think there could be a equal partnership with data centers to grow
Mm.
technology? Do you ever see a balance that could be possible with that?
That's a great question. I think AI might have the possibility, and like data centers might have the possibility of helping restorationists do that legwork of, like, one of the processes of restoration and building a restoration plan is figuring out what soil type is there. So going through like soil maps and mapping out what type of soil, going through like archives to find. I believe maybe if it's digitized, AI would have be able to help make that process much shorter. But I think there's personally way too much cost to those data centers than there is benefit currently, especially when one of the biggest issues currently out west is water consumption. I actually have a book that I brought. It's called Losing Eden by Sarah Dant, and it talks about extraction economies out west. And water has always been a conservation issue out there. And not only that, the landscape was not built to basically give water to that big of urban structures and populations that are currently out there, and also maintain the ecosystems. So I would say for where they're trying to build them, I don't think there is as much benefit as is being argued. Yeah. Of course. Thank you for the questions. Is there any other questions we have?
So, you're talking about invasive species. So
Yes.
I live on a I live on like 7 acres. That's half of it's mountainside, but
Mhm.
we have a proliferation of um, Bradford pear,
Oh, yeah.
um, the ornamental, is it double rose bush? It's like
I don't know.
they're white and double rose bush. And is honeysuckle invasive or is it native? It's
It's
invasive.
invasive.
Yeah,
There's a native honeysuckle, but
yeah. But
most of them are
most of it is invasive.
invasive.
So what do you? What would you like? Do you have any suggestions on how to help manage that?
Yeah.
Just pull it.
For honeysuckle, it depends on how big your um, how much it's covering your land, how big the invasion is, I guess you would say. Um, if it is a huge amount, I would suggest potentially treating it with herbicide. There is general use herbicides you can use. Treating that, I believe, is in the fall. I did research on that, right, Molly? Yeah, it's in the fall, and you'd probably spray it with very low percentage. We use 2% Roundup for
Okay.
honeysuckle, so spraying that and letting it die off, and then treating it from there. If you hand pull it, it's gonna be forever. Um, and then making sure that stuff in the trees is getting pulled out first. And then for Bradford pear, just cutting it.
Oh yeah, we just
Yeah,
cut it.
yeah,
It's more
chainsaw it.
yeah.
Yeah.
We just chainsaw it and then we paint that stump stopper stuff on top, so it won't because
Resprout.
I'm not
Yeah.
gonna go in there with a stump.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, no, the honeysuckle, the only issue is when they bury, some of them bury, the birds will eat it and then
Yeah.
they'll carry it further on your property or someone else's property. So there's nothing you can do about that.
Yeah,
Just
we've
stop
also
it.
got
Yeah.
tree of heaven,
Oh,
which is
yes.
the other one.
That one would be good for basil barking. Good treatment.
Good for what?
Basil barking. If you cut tree of heaven, the plant sends chemicals down to its roots that, like, basically it's a freak out, chemical freak out, and it'll sprout like 10 times from 10, like that like different spots to try and regrow
Oh
itself.
yeah, that's not good.
Yeah, so you can take chemical, I think we use 25% Garlon for that, and then you put it on the bark from about like,
Okay, so you just paint it
yeah,
with
the
Garlon.
fully around it. If there's one strip, it will still live. Yes.
Because we're trying really hard to want to restore that area. There's also a spray on the property that we want to trace and block.
Oh, cool.
Because we have all five of the North American woodpeckers. We have almost all the species of owls that are supposed to be. We have osprey because we're a quarter mile from French Broad.
Sweet.
So we want to mitigate the land and then put it into. So, but we're feeling really downtrodden because right now there's people in Hartford and they've been and it's stalled out and they're being pushed to sell and so now everybody one of the top whitewater rafting and so now we're worried that so if you know anybody who wants to buy like 500 plus acres, they were what they were trying to do.
Oh,
But
okay.
I don't know what happened with that.
Sure. Yeah, I would say that's like, there might be local restoration organizations that might help you be able to do some legwork with that one. And it might just be like connections,
Yeah,
who you
I know
know.
that Sweet,
Mhm.
is on board.
Okay, sweet. Well, hopefully it doesn't go, yeah.
Yeah, I know. I've been up there. It's absolutely beautiful. Like it's so beautiful. Like there in Max Patch. I have not hiked the ball, which now I need to do.
It's flowering. It's
Yeah,
peak
I
flowering seasons,
know.
yes.
I want to see it.
100%. And Gregory bald azaleas are cool. I believe they're their own strand of it because they've been like cross pollinating for so long up there that they're basically almost like their own subspecies of like azalea. And I've seen like all colors of azalea up there. It's awesome. And there's also like that area is considered a biological island. So it has plant species that you won't find anywhere else because with the glacier retreat, a lot of those plant species went up in elevation to protect themselves. Protect themselves. It's just their habitat range shrunk. So there's a plant species out there that there only has one other location in the Ozark Mountains and stuff like that. So there's cool. There's a lot of awesome.
Is it a hard hike to get to?
It depends what you take. I think if you take the Gregory Bald Trail from Parsons, it's about 5 miles to the Bald. But the Gregory Ridge Trail is, I think it's shorter in mileage, but it's harder in elevation incline. Yeah. See? Well, thank you guys for your questions. Is there any other questions or? Yes.
And I joined the EYS Experiences Focus class last year, and we did a class about invasive species, something like that. One of the things that I have learned that's very helpful that I still use is the iNaturalist app. How often do you use that for your data?
We have our own like data collecting paperwork that we do, but we personally use a lot of Seek and iNat to kind of when we find awesome plants on the side that we like while we're hiking or doing work. Um, yeah, so I think we use it a lot just for I use it a lot for wildflowers. I look at a lot of wildflowers and I my Seek is just a whole bunch of wildflowers I've taken pictures of. So that's true. Yeah. That's not it. Yeah.
That's not instant. Well, I used
Yeah.
to throw some virus roll. I've had bad experience with poison ivy and poison oak, and every time I look at something in my backyard,
Uh-huh.
we have green belt in the back. I'm like, wait a minute, I get it out, and it helps me
Identify it.
yeah,
Yes.
identify it to make sure I'm okay. Because I sometimes it could look exactly like poison ivy, and it's not, you know. And so yeah, so I found it very helpful.
I actually used it to identify.
Mhm. That's awesome.
Almost a, it's almost like a purple.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I'm pretty sure that some of that family, that land has been in the family for a long time. So
Somewhere, yeah. But yeah, no, iNaturalist is really good for identifying, especially if you guys are hiking through the park and you think you found one of the like Smokies rare animals or like where they want to collect more data. Collecting that and then going to a park ranger might be helpful. Usually we find some newer species, some newer invasive species. We had a vegetation member last year find the first Juro spider invasion out of Kate's Cove and found out that it was a Juro spider through Seek. So that's how we found out. And then we also found out this like cicada parasite that was in the park suddenly. Yeah, it's a funky one. I don't really remember the details on it, but we found that through Seek and then put it on 9at. Someone confirmed it, so it's good for finding new stuff too. It's just definitely make sure you have people cross check because sometimes I've found out that like Seek sometimes doesn't identify stuff correctly. So just like if you really think it's something rare, contact the park or contact someone else. And we have like botanists in house who can go out there and like have the whole textbook where they can identify stuff with keys. Hmm.
you're checking the someone's using it for data.
Yeah.
So, in the interest of librarians, like you brought what you said were some of your favorite books. What
Yes.
are the other favorite books?
I have brought obviously climate optimism. Um, I brought the Serviceberry by Robin Wall Kimmerer, which talks about like changing how we view economies from uh, trades economies, like money economies, to gift economies, and how that would be beneficial for how we view the landscape.
And that's by the author of Braiding Sweet.
It is correct. I bought Anarcho Indigenism, which talks about different views of politics and how that can help us with restoration work. Um, I brought also Black Earth Wisdom, which is about intersectional movements between like Black restorationists and environmentalism. So that one's pretty cool. Black Earth Wisdom, yes. And then I brought an ancient environmental philosophy book. This thing is I don't even know how old. But it talks about a lot of the like fundamental environmental movements from animal rights to radical ecology. So these are kind of like some of my key, I refer to them a lot. Um, but I would recommend if anyone's into environmental history, which that's near and dear to my heart, Losing Eden by Sarah Dant is a go-to read for me. I think there was a question in the back. Yeah, yeah. There's currently, yeah. um, there is, well, yeah, a couple of us are ending our season, so right now we only have 4 permanent staff for vegetation management, um, and the rest of us are seasonal or AmeriCorps terms. One's returning soon, hopefully, um, but yeah, there's that's a common theme with restoration work is not enough resources, but a lot of willpower. We definitely want to do the work, but sometimes we don't have the funding to staff, or honestly, like a lot of people wanting to give that attention. Because I mean, hey, if we're standing next to the wildlife guys, everyone wants to listen to bears, and no one really cares when you're like, I'm pulling kudzu for 8 hours, you know? But yeah, if that answers your question.
Why I wanted you to talk.
Yes.
Probably it's honestly it's way more vital than bears because
We help give them a home. Yeah. Well, sweet. Does anyone else have any other questions? Well, thank you guys for your participation and your time. I really appreciate it. And thank you for this opportunity to talk and share a little bit of our work. Yeah. Oh, you're good. Thank you.
it was excellent.
Thank you.
So I have a question for you that's personal.
Yes.
I am currently working on a book